Tonight, day 2 of the inquest into the attack on James Smith Cree Nation.
This board will work with Chief Fleury to ensure any policies and other gaps that may be identified will be addressed.
The chair of the Thunder Bay Police Services Board comments on recent tragedies in the city.
We have put measures in place to ensure that folks know, that families know that we are committed to that, including apologizing to the families for what the PCs did during the 2023 election.
And the daughter of a woman whose remains are suspected to be in a Winnipeg area landfill files a pair of human rights complaints. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. We begin in Saskatchewan tonight, where it was day 2 of the James Smith Cree Nation inquest. And it was a day filled with details of the tragedy. Our video journalist Rachel May has more from Melfort, Saskatchewan.
Today we learned the gruesome details on the day of the mass stabbing attacks on James Smith Cree Nation. The details began with the brothers making their first stop at Damien Sanderson's house in search of his wife Skye, who was not at home during the attacks. It ends with a grandson finding his grandfather deceased at a home in Weldon. We learned the attack started at approximately 5:40 a.m. Sunday, September 4th, with the last attack at approximately 7:10 a.m. The first emergency broadcast to alert the public about the attacks didn't go out until 7:12 a.m. During a 3-hour and 15-minute period, Miles Sanderson would use 5 different vehicles, which is one theory as to why it was so difficult to locate him. Following the final attack at 7:10 a.m., no more attacks are believed to have happened. Rachel May, APTN National News, Melfort, Saskatchewan.
The Whitehorse Correctional Centre has a history of lawsuits involving Charter of Rights violations. Now, another inmate is alleging he was illegally placed in segregation. Our reporter Sarah Connors has those details.
The lawyer for Norman Kindy has filed an application for a judicial review, alleging his client, an Indigenous man, was illegally placed in a segregation unit. 19-year-old Norman Kindy was charged with first-degree murder in the death of Aaron Smart last year and is awaiting trial. According to the December 28th application, a correctional officer instructed Kindy to enter his cell for lockup without the authority to do so. This led to Kindy getting into an altercation with the officer, and while entering his cell, he threw cold coffee at them. The application claims the officer retaliated by punching Kindy and placing him in several chokeholds. Kindy was transferred to the jail's arrest processing unit and then to segregation. The application states Kindy was placed in segregation out of retaliation and was not granted the required hearing before a discipline committee. Kindy's lawyer, Vincent LaRochelle, says the measures taken by the jail are problematic.
If it's feeling aggrieved by the conduct of an inmate, needs to go before an independent arbiter so that person can decide who's right, who's wrong. Is the CO right? Is the prisoner right?
LaRochelle says the jail has a track record of charter violations involving segregation. In 2019, the Supreme Court of Yukon ruled the jail's secure living units amounted to separate confinement. It also found the jail didn't have the authority to create those units. Perhaps the most well-known is a 2014 incident where Michael Niehaus, an inmate who spent years in solitary confinement, was dragged naked in front of a judge. The incident led to an independent 2018 inspection report which recommended reforms on the jail's use of segregation. Kindy has since been placed back into general population. His lawyer says it's now up to his client to decide whether or not to push the case forward. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
APTN News has now heard back from a spokesperson for the Territory's Justice Department. They say an internal review shows that proper use of force and procedures were followed in accordance with the Corrections Act. As Kindy brought the matter forward seeking judicial review, the department will not be providing further comment at this time. To Thunder Bay now, where the deaths of 2 young Indigenous women was reason for a moment of silence today. It happened at the monthly meeting of the Thunder Bay Police Services Board. Board Chair Karen Machado did it to honor the lives of Mackenzie Munoz and Jenna Osberg. Police response in both deaths has been criticized. Machado said her heart breaks for the tragic circumstances around their deaths and acknowledged the criticism and lack of trust within the Indigenous community. Machado insists the board is committed to making changes to regain trust.
I echo Onwa's calls for everyone to come together to address the systemic issues that Indigenous women and their families continue to face in our city. I know Chief Fleury also supports these efforts. Once the SIU investigation into the death of Jenna Osberg is complete, this board will work with Chief Fleury to ensure any policies and other gaps that may be identified will be addressed. We thank the SIU for sharing more details about its investigation and recent updates, given the significant community concerns.
The daughter of a woman whose remains are suspected to be in a Winnipeg area landfill has filed 2 human rights complaints against the former progressive Conservative government in Manitoba and the newly elected NDP under Premier Wab Kinew. Cambria Harris submitted the complaints on behalf of her mother Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and an unidentified woman referred to as Buffalo Woman. All 3 women are believed to be victims of an alleged serial killer. Harris has been the face of the fight to have the Prairie Green and Brady landfills searched for the remains. Her claim refers to the 2023 provincial election, where the PC party campaigned on its decision to not search the landfills. It also states the current Manitoba government is refusing to make funds available for the search. The minister in charge of gender equity, Nahani Fontaine, says searching the landfills is still a priority.
Our Premier, Wab Kinew, has made it explicitly clear that he, as the Premier, is committed to searching the landfill. And we have put measures in place to ensure that folks know, that families know that we are committed to that, including apologizing to the families for what the PCs did during the 2023 election and starting that relationship with the families in a good way.
Well, as you heard Minister Fontaine say there, Manitoba's new Premier is promising the search of the Prairie Green landfill is going to get done. Wab Kinew is our guest on tonight's episode of Face to Face. Right after the news, we discuss the landfill search becoming a provincial election issue and the efforts after the vote was over to show the families they are supported.
We invited them to the legislature, just apologize for everything that they went through. We smoked a pipe together. I want to show them that we're serious about having a culturally respectful conversation and dialogue with them. They had some tough questions. They had some, things to get off their chest, I think I can say, because everyone would, being in their situation. And so we just started it from there. And now where we're at, we're in that machinery of government. Like, what is a budget look like? What does the process look like? How do you do the health and safety? What is the structure? All these different kind of more procedural things. And so we're still gonna keep that dialogue with the families open and the Indigenous leadership, and we're gonna get this thing done.
Over to Ottawa now, where a long-awaited national council to monitor the Trudeau government's progress on reconciliation is on the verge of becoming law. Bill C-29 has passed through both the House and Senate and should get royal assent in the upcoming session. However, as APTN's Fraser Needham reports, C-29 has its critics.
Carol McBride says the Native Women's Association of Canada has a lot to offer the proposed Reconciliation Council and is eager to get to work.
It's something that we advocate for every day. The safety of our women, the programs that we have in place to make sure that they are safe.
But NWAC had to lobby the government to be added to the council because initially only the Assembly of First Nations, Métis National Council, and Inuit Tapiriit Kanatami, or ITK, could nominate council members. ITK withdrew because it says Bill C-29 does little to make the federal government fulfill its obligations to reconciliation. As well, the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, or CAP, has also been left off the council. APTN News asked McBride whether CAP should be added.
Well, I think I think, any way that we can get the picture of the issues across the country, from across the country, is definitely a plus for our people.
It doesn't get much better when it comes to outside assessment of Bill C-29. A new report by the Toronto-based Yellowhead Institute says the government has yet to meet any of the Truth and Reconciliation's 94 calls to action, except it is close to completing Action 53, creating a National Council for Reconciliation.
But when it comes to the other substantive calls to action, particularly calls to action around child welfare, education, justice, languages, I think it's quite clear that they haven't actually completed those specific calls.
And without adequate funding and the ability to access all the government documents it requires, he says the council won't be effective either.
The Senate Standing Committee on Indigenous Affairs did call for funding comparable with the Aboriginal Healing Fund as sort of a benchmark. If that were the case, I think that could create like a stable long-term funding model. It's possible. And they did add in language to the bill that allows the council to use the courts. I don't think that's sufficient. I think there should be subpoena powers provided to the council. But, there's a possibility that it'll be effective.
APTN reached out to Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Gary-Ann Desaintegre about concerns raised in the Yellowhead report. In an emailed statement, his office says, once Bill C-29 becomes law, it will fulfill TRC calls to action 53 to 56. It also says an investment of $125 million is substantial, and funding may increase as demands evolve. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
A new study has been announced to detect and prevent tuberculosis. Details on that and more after the break. Welcome back. A new research study announced from Iqaluit today. The city, the Nunavut government, and Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated announced a new partnership with the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute to better detect and prevent the spread of tuberculosis early. The Time a TB wastewater study will be testing Iqaluit's wastewater for TB year-round for the next 5 years. The study aims to see whether or not early public health interventions will assist in treating TB early. The Canadian Institute of Health Research contributed $3 million for the study, while NTI contributed $500,000. According to Nunavut's top doc, the new initiative expands on past wastewater testing initiatives.
Now, this initiative is really quite groundbreaking and stems from perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of the pandemic, where screening was undertaken on wastewater, and that's now been extended to other areas besides infectious disease, COVID, to drugs, and of course now to TB.
A new program in Manitoba will offer more supports for survivors of sexual assault. The province announced the Sexual Assault and Intimate Partner Violence Crisis Response Program, a partnership between Gynecologic and Clinic Community Health. The $1.3 million program is open to all Manitobans. Services offered include physical examinations, emotional and mental health supports, and Indigenous cultural supports. Minister of Families Nahani Fontaine says only 6% of sexual assaults are reported, and of those, the majority of cases are Indigenous.
Survivors now have options as to which service they wish to access, and culturally specific care through Indigenous-led organizations like Gynecologic means that our knowledge keepers, our aunties, our cookums, are available to be part of the support that's offered.
When it comes to climate change, 2023 was one for the books. Last year, Canadians experienced wildfires, smoke-filled skies, and devastating floods. Not to mention 2023 was the hottest year on record. Here today to talk about climate change and what that means for Indigenous communities is Merle Ballard, Director of Environment and Climate Change, Canada's Indigenous Science Division. Merle, thanks for being with us today. Can you talk about how Indigenous communities in Canada are coping with climate events like wildfires and flooding?
Yes, thank you for having me. Indigenous peoples in Canada are coping, but the coping mechanisms are slower than the rest of Canada because a lot of Indigenous peoples are the ones that are mostly impacted, live in remote areas. A lot of them live in flying communities, so the response time is a little bit longer. And a lot of there's not that much infrastructure in a lot of these communities. So, like, for example, the remote communities, when there's a wildfire and they need to evacuate, the response time is a lot slower. Like, they don't have a proper facilities. A lot of the runways for airports are gravel road. They don't have the paved road, and the airplanes carrying evacuees from the large forest fires as well too. They have a smaller capacities, so the response time is longer. And during the winter, with severe weather as well too, the impacts are greater for Indigenous communities because their homes are more. They're not the best of quality, so the response to severe weather in the winter too is impacted.
You know, right now we have the prairies are completely frozen, yet we have Nunavut flooding right now. How can Indigenous knowledge prepare us for an ever-changing climate?
Yeah, I think that's very important. I think Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous science need to be part of the decision-making processes. They have to ask Indigenous peoples what their knowledge, because Indigenous science knows about weather predictions. They know about climate change, because these are the people that are on the ground that observe changes daily and based on real-time events. So the Indigenous science of Indigenous peoples is really important, and to have a dialogue with the people, I think, is really important. The Indigenous science of the people and the ability to predict weather changes, weather phenomenon that's happening, and for government to respond to decision makers need to consult with Indigenous peoples regarding their knowledge of the weather.
Merle,
and what's happening.
Sorry about that. News reports are saying 2024 could be an even hotter than last year. How can Indigenous communities stay resilient in the face of climate change?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be resilient, I think Indigenous peoples are resilient. They adapt to changes, whether it's climate change or other. But to be resilient too, they need the resources as well. They need the capacity to be resilient. They need the infrastructure, and a lot of these go back to the policies that are in place. So I think Indigenous peoples to be more resilient, they're adapting to climate change, and they're finding means and mechanisms to adapt to climate change.
Merle, we'll have to leave it there, but certainly appreciate you taking some time for us.
Thank you.
He will be the first Canadian to go to the moon, but today Jeremy Hansen was speaking with Indigenous students. That story is coming up after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Jared Delorme wanted to share a photo, this one from a past summer trip to Jasper National Park, located in Alberta, helping remind us all what's in store once the winter passes. Thanks for that, Jared. Beautiful Rocky Mountains there. You can be our next photo of the day by sending a photo to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 0 for Charlottetown, -6 in Halifax, 17 below in Kuujjuaq, -14 in Nain, -9 for Montreal, snow and 11 below in Val-d'Or. Snow and -9 for Sault Ste. Marie, flurries and 10 below in North Bay. -16 with snow in Thunder Bay, snow and 18 in Sioux Lookout. In northern Manitoba, 19 below for God's Lake, -17 with snow in Norway House, 17 below with snow in Winnipeg, -18 in Brandon, 21 below in Regina, Saskatoon, Yorkton, and Swift Current, -22 with snow in Meadow Lake, 25 below and snow in Buffalo Narrows. In northern Alberta, -24 with snow in High Level and Peace River, -21 in Edmonton, 8 below with snow in Lethbridge, 0 in Vancouver, -8 with snow in Kamloops, 14 below for Prince George and Smithers, -13 with snow in Old Crow, 30 below in Dawson, -27 in Yellowknife, snow and 16 below for Norman Wells, -23 in Sax Harbor and Fort McPherson, 6 below for Chesterfield with snow, -8 and snow in Whale Cove, 9 below in Resolute, -6 in Iqaluit. Students from a dozen schools in Indigenous communities got an out-of-this-world lesson today. Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen joined them for a virtual chat this morning.
The one thing I have come to realize is that every single human on our planet has equal value, every single one. And every single human has important gifts to share with the world, to share with their communities, to bring together to help lift us all up collectively. And that is buried inside of each of you. And so if you remember...
Hansen, who will be the first Canadian to go to the moon, joined the students by video to talk about the Artemis II mission and Canada's role in lunar exploration. He also spoke about the reality of facing challenges and the importance of following their dreams. Has anyone really ever been to the moon? Just kidding. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Tuesday. For news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Now stick around, Face to Face is up next. Our guest tonight, the first Anishinaabe Premier of a province in Canada, Wabkanu. That's just seconds away. I'm Dennis Ward, Marcy McGwitch. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.